Joining me now is Danielle Pletka, Vice President of Foreign and Defense Policy Studies with the American Enterprise Institute. And Danielle, we've got the New York Times columnist David Brooks summing up the trip, saying that the chief oddity that we seem to be mean to our friends and kind to our foes. Take a listen.
We're supposed to be against terrorism, and Trump loves to talk about Iran's influence on terrorism. But the main source of terror funding for both the ideas and sometimes the organizations is Saudi Arabia. It's not Iran. But somehow we're super nice to Saudi Arabia. Meanwhile, we're super mean to Germany and France and some of our NATO allies.
So has the president really flipped the script here? Because, yes, I think, can see the president being stern with our friends, but they also did sign this agreement while the president announced this in Saudi Arabia for the Gulf Cooperation Council to cut back on funding terrorism, which mainly comes from these Gulf countries. Is that a step forward?
First of all, I think that's a very confused characterization of what's going on in the Middle East. Look, Saudi Arabia, Wahhabi Saudi Arabia, has done an enormous amount to spread Islamist extremism and to provide an environment in which there is Islamist extremism. But I wouldn't characterize Saudi Arabia as the biggest problem that we face out there. I think it is part of a larger problem that certainly was fomented by them and by the Iranians. So I think David Brooks's characterization there is a little bit confused. Look, what Trump was doing was he was being the anti-Obama. If Obama was the president who saw everything in the Middle East through the prism of Tehran, Iran, how can we make them happy? Trump is exactly the opposite. That's why he's so beloved to the Saudis.
When we think about the Middle East and the president ramping up the arms sales there, also repeating the word peace over and over again, he did, Danielle, dance around the phrase that we know he used on the campaign trail and here at home, radical Islamic terrorism. No mention then also of moving the U.S. Embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. So what do you think that the agenda for peace in that region really is? And to your point about Saudi Arabia being one of the greatest places that can enhance terrorism for not only that region, but the world.
Well, you know, Thomas, Saudi Arabia can be a huge ally to us if we are stern about what our limits are and what we will accept. So, you know, I think the president had an idea. I think that's why he went to Saudi. That's why he went to Jerusalem. That's why he went to the Vatican. He has an idea going forward. The question really is, what is this peace that he keeps talking about? And you're asking the $64,000 question. I don't think any of us are entirely clear about where we go from here. And that includes the Arab-Israeli peace process, what the Gulf is doing. You know, selling arms to Saudi Arabia and to the United Arab Emirates may be a good thing to do, but it's not a strategy. But
when it comes to having insight into private funding into terrorist organizations, and I think everybody would agree that Trump's ideology revolves around money. Saudi Arabia is certainly a country that has an ideology that is buoyed by its deep pockets of oil money. So in having a look at who is potentially funding private people in Saudi Arabia and these Gulf nations, privately funding terrorists, is that a step forward in cracking the code to somehow dismantling it?
Let's just unpack what you just said. First of all, I'm not sure Donald Trump has an ideology, and if he does, I'm not sure that it revolves around money. I suspect that it revolves much more around Donald Trump than anything else. Second of all, I think you're talking about a Saudi Arabia that in many ways doesn't exist anymore. Saudi Arabia is not really anymore the prime private funder of terrorist organizations. I would say that role has slipped to individuals from Qatar and from other places. So let's be a little fair to Saudi Arabia, understanding that their historic role was extraordinarily troublesome, extraordinarily dangerous.
All right, I take your point, but I certainly think that money would be a Donald Trump, you know, praise to the bank of Donald Trump. Anyway, Axios picked up on the body language, though, Danielle, from the G7 summit. Trump kind of the odd man out at the Paris Climate Accord, NATO's principal mutual defense. Top it off, we look at the G6 taking a stroll on the last day of Italy, and Trump actually followed along on a golf cart. And you kind of see how they're separated there. Do you think that this is a problem that Trump is literally trying to be the type of isolationist that he has proposed America be, America first, and the rest of the world, do what you got to do, but you're not going to rely on us.
You know, I can't stand that expression, America first. I mean, its history is absolutely awful, and I wish the president would leave it alone. I know his aides have tried to amend it to say, well, America first, but never America alone. But the reality is the one that we saw on the ground in Europe, and that is that the president is, in fact, uncomfortable with some of our European allies. I think he's not as immersed in the issues as they are. I think he's not as down with the ideas that they're down with, and I think that he is separate from them on things like the Paris Accords. So, you know, I think altogether it was, while it was not a terrible trip, I think that in Europe it was a little bit uncomfortable, and I think you rightly characterize it. We saw the physical results.
Danielle Pletka, great to have you on, Danielle. I really appreciate your thoughts, your insight, your answers. Thank you.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.